Okay guys, my name's Kermit. Welcome back to Vanguard. Behind me is a 1930 Chevy Huckster. If I'm not mistaken, it's the first year for these things. And I'll tell you one thing, you could have the biggest motor in the world and there's always going to be someone that's going to be faster than you. But you know what? When you're driving one of these, you're probably not going to find anyone that's cooler than you. So with not really saying too much more, let's hear that old Stovebolt run. Okay, well, starting at the front of this, you can see that very few modifications, if any, and what modifications have been done are very tasteful. It has had turn signals added to this thing. These are sealed beam headlights inside here. Of course, they've both been replaced. The turn signals have both been worked on. Everything works just fine on this. Inside this little thing here, you actually take this cap off, and inside this is where you actually stick the crank. The crank comes with the car, just in case, just for heck, it's actually just really fun to do if you ever want to fire it off like that. Just watch it. They've been known to hurt people when they backfire, if they do, or kick back on you. You can see the paint on this thing is absolutely beautiful. I mean, this thing just plain pops. I mean, you can see here that, once again, you've also got these running lights up here. They also work. That little running light back there actually works. Brake lights work. As I said, turn signals work. But back to the paint, I mean, this thing looks amazing for what it is. I mean, 1930, and something else I'd like to point out too. The bodies on these things, the framework here is all wood, and this is just like a steel veneer that they actually tacked over this. And there is, of course, being a 1930, there was no machine that did that. There was a guy that actually held all this together and actually tacked nails in this thing and put this thing together. And this thing has held up wonderfully over the years. As you can see, it does have the correct bias ply tires on it. It does have the mechanical drum brakes under it. And of course, I personally have checked out everything underneath this car, and I think everything is absolutely fine. And when we get to the interior, I'll show you what I've done underneath the dash. It's absolutely, it's beautiful. It's been updated, not, untastefully. It's been updated, to be a solid driver automobile. As you can see here, we do have these like roll-up flaps here in the back. They just roll right down. You can actually pin them to here, and you can drive this thing with it open or closed, whatever you decide. In the back here, we can just do like if you actually pull these up, you can see here, the bed in this thing is in really good shape. Wood bed, this is wood as well. Let this down slowly here. And I mean, probably back in the day, this thing would have been hauling fruit or something of that nature, who knows. But it survived very well, and if I'm not mistaken, the speedometer shows 70,000 miles on this thing, which is pretty amazing that it survived, and it runs as good as it does, that all being said. Closes just like that. Coming around to this side of it, you can see, just wonderful shape, and you can see everything in this paint. Especially with these antiques, people normally don't take the time to paint these things this nice. And I absolutely love this car. This is officially one of my favorite cars in the shop. There's only one or two cars battling for it, and both of those are 1930s and 1931 cars as well. But this thing drives absolutely amazing, as we're just about ready to see. Runs fantastic. I mean, this thing is just, it truly is amazing. That all being said, let's take a look at the interior. Okay guys, as you can see, the interior obviously has been redone whenever they restored the car, or the truck I should say. Of course, they've got beautiful door panels on the thing. The seats are in great shape. Of course, you can see the carpet's in wonderful shape. Everything in here works. The oil pressure gauge, speedometer, the trip odometer. You can see here we've got all of our knobs labeled there. The gas gauge actually works. Amp meter works, coolant gauge works. You even pull that light switch out, the dash lights come on. I'll show you that here when we go to drive the thing. Horn works, emergency flashers work. And something else that we did here, I actually did personally, if you'd like to look underneath the dash there, you can see that this thing has been completely and totally rewired. Everything is nice and safe. There's none of that old school cotton wiring underneath there with, that just basically is wiring wrapped in tinder or kindling. It's been updated, of course, not to where you can see much of it. Most of it's hidden, but it's very, very solid. Everything under there works just fine, just as it was designed to. And outside of that, let's check out the passenger side. Okay guys, on this side, obviously it's in just as good shape as the other side. They didn't just restore one side of the interior. I took the seat out of it just to show you. This is where the fuel tank is at. Over there is where the sending unit is. Of course, we've had all the, I had the sending unit apart, repaired that and put new floats on it and everything. So the gas gauge is completely and totally accurate. When you see me drive it, you'll see that it's full. That's true, you do have a full tank of gas. Like I had mentioned in the front of the vehicle, it does come with the old crank. I believe this is the original crank for the car. That comes with it, and it just sits right behind here. You do have storage on either side of underneath the seats on this side and over there. And pretty much that's about it for the interior on this thing. I say we get to take this thing for a little cruise. Alright guys, taking the Huckster for a little cruise here. This thing just cruises along just fine. No synchronizers in the transmission, just the way it should be, but you can see how smoothly it shifts. Gets up to speed just fine. You do got a double clutch, or if you're really good, you don't necessarily have to, but you got to know what you're doing. And in fact, you don't even really have to use the clutch of this thing if you're really good. And with a little bit of practice, you'll be able to do it just fine. And this thing just motors. It runs absolutely awesome. It doesn't ride all that bad. As you can see, oil pressure gauge is functional. We got a functional speedometer, functional charge gauge. We got a functional water temperature gauge. Gas gauge is functioning. That's not lying. You do have a full tank of gas in this thing. Advanced knob there. I've got it a little bit less advanced just for low speed cruising. If you were to hop this thing up kind of out on like a I don't want to say freeway, because this thing really, it's happy doing about 45, 50. I wouldn't really recommend doing much more than that with it. But if you were to get it up to like real cruising speed, you could definitely go ahead and put a little bit of timing in it. You can see the thing stops just fine. Get her in gear here. Notice the motor is not really all that noisy, and if I kind of get into it a little bit, it gets right up to speed. Goes right into gear, no problems whatsoever. If you let go of the wheel, it actually steers pretty darn straight. Doesn't handle all that bad. I mean, this thing, it's impossible to not have fun in this car. Like I said, there are going to be a million people that'll be faster than you no matter what you're driving. But you know what? When you're driving one of these, there's really not many that's going to be cooler than you. There you go, got the downshift. Coming around the corner. About 15 pounds of oil pressure. Now this is a low pressure Stovebolt, which is very, very normal for these engines. Coming up on about 30 miles an hour right now. I would like to showcase that this does indeed work. I mean, that works. I mean, this thing just absolutely, it is by far my favorite car in the shop as of right now. It's competing with just a couple other old timers, but you know what? They don't drive this good. Let me give this a tighten down here just so it didn't bother me in the video. Wait for these cars to pass. Turn signals do work on this thing, both left, right, and if you pull, it's emergency flashers. This is a 50s turn signal switch that's on this thing. Here we go. Gets right up to speed, no problems. Turn the turn signal off. Right to gear, no problems. The transmission's relatively quiet. Parking brake does work in this thing. What else? Everything else is on fuses on here as far as your electronics go. If you can't really see it now because it's daylight out, but you got fully functional headlights on this thing. The dash lights even work on this. Regular, I wired it up just like a regular headlight switch. One pull out is markers. Full pull out is your full headlights. You got high and low beam on this thing. I also did flush the transmission, or not the transmission. I did actually change the transmission lubricant in it for you guys, and I also changed the radiator fluid in this as well. So that's nice, clean, green, and your transmission fluid is the correct heavyweight transmission fluid that would have came in this back from the day, which is once again why it shifts as well as it does, is it's got the right stuff in it. Unfortunately, we are coming back to the shop, so I have to actually stop driving this thing, as much fun as this is. But we'll throw it up on the hoist here if we can find one for it, and I get to really talk about the guts of this thing and what it really is. This thing is Like I said, it's just the way that it should be. I'm pretty sure the motor is right for the car. I'm pretty sure the trans is right for the car. The rear end is right for it. I mean, it's absolutely an amazing driving experience. It's a very, very raw driving experience, and you guys got to come in and see this one. This one is just unreal. Okay guys, this is the underside of the Huckster. This thing underneath is actually, considering its age, has survived just to an immaculate state. You can see here we got our torque tube style rear end in this thing. We do have modern style shocks that somebody added to the rear of this vehicle. Definitely a much appreciated upgrade for the ride quality of the car. Of course, I checked the rear end lube. It does have the correct thick 600 weight oil, which is what should be in this stuff. On either end of this axle, mechanical brakes, of course, I've had those apart. I was happy with everything I saw in there. Everything got cleaned, so on and so forth. Moving forward to that, here's our linkage for all of our mechanical brakes. You can see we've got our exhaust here, all just original type exhaust in this thing. We got both of our shackles and then our front shackles here. Of course, they've been greased per the inspection on the car. I greased everything underneath here for this thing. Moving forward to that, I'd like to point out, you can see I've got this brand new fuel line on it here, brand new petcock and all. This would be off, that is on, and that's just in case you want to go to store the car, whatever it may be. That's what the petcock is for, if you need to work on the fuel system, whatever it may be. This here is a 3-speed correct, I guess it's gear correct for the car. It's a 3-speed unsynchronized gearbox, as you saw in the driving video of the car. This thing, the casting date is 5/20, let's see here, 28, I believe, 1930, which is pretty close to about right for this car. It would be pretty surprising to me to find that somebody has found one of these things and replaced it with something that would be so year similar. And this is a truck specific or heavy duty type transmission that would be in these things. So all that being said, I have to say that this is more than likely the right transmission for this car. Just to the side of that, I should say we have a 6-volt battery, brand new in this thing for you guys. Moving forward with that, you can see here that we've got all this new wiring here that I installed in the car. All this is brand new on this thing. Everything is wired up properly and safely on this thing, so that way you guys should be able to drive it pretty much problem-free as far as the electrical system goes. You can see this big Hankin oil pan here, and that is to accommodate this massive crankshaft that's in this old Stovebolt 6-cylinder, which I'm going to show you in just a second. Of course, you got our pans here. We've got our road draft tube here. The idea behind this is that as air rushes past it, it creates a suction effect and actually sucks clean air into the engine, which is a pretty neat idea. And this was actually used up into the 50s and even the 60s. Moving forward to that, of course, we got our front brakes here. Of course, I've had those completely apart on this thing, and I've even re-greased and cleaned the wheel bearings. Everything looked to be excellent in it. Greased the whole front end on it. It's and of course adjusted your brakes, cleaned your brakes. Everything seemed to be in pretty good shape on it. I was happy with everything I saw in there. Of course, I greased your leaf spring shackles here in the front and in the rear. Everything seemed to be pretty healthy on this thing, and it drives as it should. It drives like a good old healthy car. This little, just FYI, this little knob here, if you unscrew this, this is where you actually put the crank for the old antique starter, and that actually comes with the car, as you saw in the showroom video. You can actually fire this thing off like that if the battery does, for whatever reason, decide to die on you. So outside of that, we're going to lower it down, and we're going to show you the what I believe to be the original 194 cubic inch Stovebolt 6-cylinder under the hood. All right, guys, for wheels and tires, we have the original type spoke wheel on this thing. We do have, for tires on them, we have a 4.75 by 5 R19 bias ply tire, which is exactly what this should be. The white walls look great on it. It's a 4-ply tire, and the thing looks to be in pretty good shape. I'd have to say that there's pretty minimal dry rotting on it for as old as the car is. Of course, the tires aren't as old as the car is, but a lot of the time these things like to sit around a lot. But this thing looks like it's in pretty darn good shape and to survive the years pretty darn well. Let's go check out the rears. Okay, guys, 4.75 by 5 R19 inch rim, which is saying this is a 19-inch wire wheel, the original type rim. As you can see, it's in pretty darn good shape, and you can see the tire once again is in pretty darn good shape. 4-ply bias ply tire, just like what's on the front, and these little pizza cutters are actually in really good shape for the year. Let's go check out the Stovebolt under the hood. All right, this is the 194 cubic inch Stovebolt 6-cylinder that resides underneath the bonnet of this car. This is truly what the stove bolts actually were. Now, you hear me use the term stove bolt a lot when even referring to the later model, like the 50s truck engines and the 40s engines, but they're more so referred to as a blue flame straight six. This truly is a stove bolt 6-cylinder, and they got that nickname from this plate that goes on the side of the motor here that covers all the internals of the engine. So that all being said, I'd also like to say that this thing is, I believe, to be the original motor to this car here. It was cast March 11th, 1930, and there's a serial number here that's stamped onto this little pad right here. Now, this was not originally meant to be a VIN number. It was just a sequential number stamped in succession with the years. You know, just as every motor went out, they stamped the, the next number into the pad there on the side of the engine. So that all being said, March 11th lines right up about the time that this thing was going to end up being produced, and it just seems to be right for me. Outside of all of that, you can see here we've got a brand new fuel line that I put on this thing. This runs all the way from the tank back, as you saw underneath, and this runs all the way up to the carburetor, which you're going to see in just a second. I'd also like to point out while we're over here that we've got a brand new lower radiator hose that I put on this thing. I did clean and maintain the original clamps for this. You can see some of the new wiring that we have in it. We do have a little bit more modern style fan up front here. Of course, the motor's painted up absolutely beautifully. I mean, this is kind of a relatively hard color to find, the Chevy gray for these old antiques. Moving this way, I'd like to also point out, I'd like to say we do still have points in this distributor. They're set, it runs great. We have brand new wiring all throughout this car. As I said, I rewired this entire automobile. We have a maxi fuse here. We do have, of course, brand new cables going up from the battery to the starter, and then from this up here to the maxi fuse and into the car. And of course, it's all on fuse. It's got a fuse block in there. It all runs through the amp gauge. Everything works as you guys saw. And I'd also like to point out too is when I went to go start this thing up outside, I'm sure you saw it. Notice that on the top of the valve cover here, you have these three little, I guess it would be holes in the valve cover here, and that was meant as air rushed past it to almost be kind of like a road draft tube, in addition to the road draft tube that's down there. I'd like to point out that you didn't really see any smoke coming out of those, which would be an implication of blow-by. This engine actually seems to be extremely healthy as far as like, the top end compression goes. I mean, I don't see anything coming out of it. Didn't even want to steam even, which is very common for these things, especially being this old. You would imagine it to be worn out, and this thing is just in excellent shape, and it runs fantastic. Outside of that, I think that's about all we need to cover on this side of the engine. We're going to go on over to the other side, and we'll show you the little Carter 1 barrel and all the goodies that's over there. All right, guys, on this side of our Stovebolt, you can see here we've got a couple things to talk about, one of which being, if we're going to start from the front back, we have a alternator upgrade on this. This is a 6-volt alternator, negative ground, positive cable here. Now this is not something we did, this is something the previous owner did, and this thing charges rock solid at 7 volts. Once again, just upgrades to the electrical system, which in my opinion was kind of one of the weaker points on these cars when they first came out. And of course it's all been updated to the point of, I would consider a pretty high level of reliability. Underneath that, here's our horn here, the old style Uga horns. I've had this thing apart. I've cleaned it, oiled it, adjusted it. It works fantastic, as you saw in the rest of the video. If I didn't blow the camera speaker out on that one. I guess backward of that, you can see we've got our Carter 1 barrel carburetor. This is the updraft model carburetor, which is correct for the year of the car. Now this carburetor here and this setup on this engine, this thing produced, if I'm not mistaken, 50 horsepower, a whopping 50 horsepower at 2,600 RPM, which for back in the day, it's actually a surprising amount of horsepower considering the Model T and the Model A. I think the Model A at this point, which would have been out at this time, produced 40 horsepower, if I'm not mistaken. So this was an upgrade from that. Of course, then again, you had 2 more cylinders, and actually Chevy's slogan back in the day was 6 for the price of 4, which is what you're kind of getting here. And that kind of embodies what we got going on here. And of course, they lengthened the whole chassis of these things and all this stuff to accommodate these bigger engines. Moving backward from that, you can see we've got an oil filter on this. I did change the oil in this engine when I went and took this car through its process. Of course, you've got a Wix filter in here, 1540 weight oil change. It's nice and clean. Dipstick's right down here between this here, down behind the carburetor. This right here would be your gearbox here. I greased that for you guys along with the whole rest of the car. I'd also like to point out, you can see here the rest of the wiring here that of course has all been upgraded. Brake light switch right there, so on and so forth. The rest of the wiring harness moves throughout the car, as you were going to see, or you have seen, I should say. Outside of that, this thing is just a wonderful example of an old antique automobile. I mean, these things are ingrained into American history as much as, you know, a lot of things that we'd like to, you know, put into American history, I suppose, you know, from anything from our old antique brown Besses that, you know, people seem to talk about with like the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. This is, I think, another section of American history that isn't often talked about. You know, when people were driving these things from one end of the country to the other during the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, all these kind of cars were around. So that all being said, if you'd like to have this piece of American history parked in your driveway and or your garage, give Tom a call at the number below and let Vanguard Motor Sales park this old Huckster in your driveway.